If people seem distant, quiet, or slightly uncomfortable around you, it might not be rejection. It might be intimidation. At first, it doesn't make sense. You walk into a conversation and something subtly shifts. The energy changes, but no one says anything directly. People get a little quieter. Their tone softens. The flow of conversation slows down. It's not obvious enough to call out, but it's there. You notice that people avoid eye contact more than usual. They look at you for a second, then quickly look away. Not in a rude way, but almost like they don't want to hold the gaze too long. And then there's something even more confusing. People rarely disagree with you. Even when you know they probably have a different opinion, they don't challenge you. They nod. They go along. They stay neutral. Conversations feel controlled, but not naturally. There's a kind of invisible tension in the air, not conflict, not hostility, just a quiet pressure. And if you've experienced this, your first instinct is usually the same. Am I doing something wrong? Maybe you think you're coming across as awkward or too serious or maybe even unlikable, but what if that's not what's happening? What if the reason people act differently around you isn't because they don't respect you, but because they feel intimidated by you? That idea changes everything because intimidation doesn't always look the way people expect. It's not always loud. It's not always aggressive. It's not about dominance or trying to overpower others. In many cases, it's the opposite. It comes from being composed, from being observant, from not reacting too quickly, from holding your space without needing validation. It's the kind of presence that feels controlled and slightly unpredictable, and that's what creates tension. Because when people can't easily read you, they become more careful, more aware of what they say, more cautious about how they come across. Not because you've done anything wrong, but because your behavior sends signals. Signals of confidence, signals of self-control, signals that you're not easily influenced or affected, and people react to those signals automatically. They adjust, sometimes without even realizing it, which leads to the most interesting part of all. Most people who intimidate others have no idea they're doing it. They're not trying to create distance. They're not trying to make others uncomfortable. They're just being themselves, but their presence alone shifts the dynamic. And once you understand that, a lot of confusing social situations suddenly start to make sense. So instead of asking, what am I doing wrong? The better question becomes, what signals am I giving without realizing it? So here are 7 subtle signs you might be intimidating people without even knowing it. So how do you know if this is actually happening? Intimidation isn't something people will tell you directly. It shows up in small, consistent patterns, subtle shifts in behavior that are easy to overlook if you're not paying attention. Here are 7 signs your presence might be affecting people more than you realize. 1. People act different around you. One of the clearest signs is inconsistency. You notice that people don't act the same around you as they do with others. Their tone changes, they become more careful with their words. They think before they speak in a way that feels slightly unnatural. It's not that they're being fake, they're adjusting. They're filtering themselves more, holding back a little, not expressing things as freely as they normally would. And that shift usually means one thing: they're aware of you in a different way. 2. They avoid eye contact. Eye contact is one of the most natural social behaviors. But when someone feels even slight pressure, it changes. You might notice shorter glances. People look at you briefly, then quickly look away. Or they avoid direct eye contact altogether during conversations. It's not necessarily fear, it's discomfort. Holding eye contact with someone who feels intense, composed, or hard to read can feel exposing. So people instinctively pull away from it. 3. They rarely challenge you. Disagreement is normal in healthy conversations, but if people rarely question you, rarely push back, or avoid expressing different opinions, it's worth noticing. Even when they clearly think differently, they stay quiet, or they soften their disagreement so much that it almost disappears. This doesn't always mean they agree with you. It often means you come across as difficult to confront. 4. Conversations feel controlled. You may not even be trying, but you naturally set the tone. The pace of the conversation follows you. The direction shifts based on what you say. Others respond to you more than they initiate. There's less spontaneity, less randomness. Everything feels slightly more structured, more contained. And while that can feel like control, it can also create subtle pressure for others to stay in line with the dynamic. 5. People over-explain themselves. This one is easy to miss, but very telling. People start adding extra explanations, justifying small decisions, giving more detail than necessary. It's like they're trying to make sure everything they say is clear, correct, and acceptable. They don't want to be misunderstood. They don't want to make a mistake, so they compensate by explaining more than they normally would. 6. You're seen as serious or cold. Even if you don't feel that way internally, people may describe you as distant, serious, or hard to read. Not because you lack emotion, but because you don't express it as openly. Your calmness, your control, your stillness can be misinterpreted. People often confuse emotional stability with emotional distance, and that perception alone can create a barrier. 7. You observe more than you speak. You tend to listen more than you talk. You watch. You process. You take in what's happening before you respond. And while that's a strength, it can also create a certain atmosphere, because when someone feels like they're being observed closely, it can feel like they're being evaluated, not judged, but assessed. And that creates quiet pressure. When you step back and look at all of this, a pattern becomes clear. This isn't about being too much or too little. It's not something good or bad. It's simply a signal of presence, a signal of control, a signal of emotional distance or intensity. And people respond to those signals automatically. They adjust their behavior, not because they want to, but because something about your presence makes them more aware of themselves. But if your presence changes how people behave, what should you actually do about it? So what do you actually do with all of this? The goal isn't to become less intimidating. It's not about lowering your presence, talking more just to fill space, or trying to be someone you're not. Because being intimidating isn't the problem. Uncontrolled distance is. There's a difference between having a strong presence and unintentionally creating a wall between you and other people. And most of the time, that wall isn't built out of anything obvious. It's built out of silence without warmth, control without expression, confidence without connection. That's what creates distance. But here's the shift that changes everything. You don't need to lose your strength to become more approachable. You just need to balance it. Because real presence isn't just about control. It's about how that control makes others feel. And the key is simple: control plus warmth. You keep your calmness, you keep your awareness, you keep your ability to stay grounded under pressure, but you add small signals that make people feel safe around you. Not big, exaggerated changes, subtle ones. A slight smile when someone speaks, a small nod to show you're engaged, a softer expression in moments where you would normally stay neutral. These signals seem small, but they completely change how your presence is perceived. They tell people you're not being judged. You're allowed to relax. This space is safe. And that removes the tension. Another powerful shift is something even simpler. Speak first. When you stay quiet for too long, people start to overthink. They wonder what you're thinking. They become more aware of themselves. But when you initiate, even briefly, you lower that pressure instantly. It doesn't have to be anything deep. A simple comment, a light observation, a small question, that's enough to open the space. Because now, instead of reacting to your presence, people are engaging with you, and that changes the dynamic. Then there's something even more important. Give people permission to be themselves, not by saying it directly, but by how you respond. When someone speaks, don't just analyze, acknowledge. When someone makes a mistake, don't go silent, stay relaxed. When someone shares something, don't stay unreadable. Show that you hear them, because people don't just react to who you are. They react to how safe they feel being themselves around you, and when that safety is there, the tension disappears. What's left is something much stronger than intimidation: respect, connection, trust. And here's the most important part. You don't need to shrink yourself to make others comfortable. You don't need to become louder, softer, funnier, or more expressive just to fit in. Your presence is not the problem. It's how that presence is experienced. And once you understand that, you stop choosing between strength and connection. You combine them, because when you balance control with warmth, something powerful happens. People stop feeling pressure around you, as I say, and start feeling drawn to you, not because you've changed who you are, but because you've made your presence easier to be around. And that's the difference. Because in the end, when you combine strength with warmth, people don't feel intimidated. They feel drawn to you.